Now to a tale of adventure, adversity and survival against the odds. 100 years ago, Ernest Shackleton led a British expedition attempting to make the first land crossing of Antarctica. The ship, the Endurance, though, became trapped in the ice and eventually sank.
To mark the centenary and the survival of Shackleton and his men, the Royal Geographical Society has opened an exhibition of photos taken during the voyage.
In a moment we're going to speak to its curator, Meredith Hooper. Good morning. First, though, we can go to the Southern Ocean, we hope, where the adventurer broadcaster Rebecca Stevens and her daughter Anna are on board a ship which is tracing Shackleton's original route. Good morning, Rebecca. I hope you can hear us. What are you hoping to get out of your trip?
Good morning. We can hear you absolutely perfectly. We're incredibly lucky this morning. The sea is calm and the skies are almost clear. We came through a gale 8 yesterday in open water, which made you realise what it was like for Shackleton exactly 100 years ago. And today we're travelling on a very comfortable Silver Seas Explorer boat, being looked after at every turn. But the weather, of course, is the same, and you begin to realise what an extraordinary feat it was. His ship sank, of course, on the 21st of November, leaving them stranded on the ice, and they were floating on the ice for about 5 months before they were released into the open sea. And I think the most extraordinary thing is, not today, but yesterday, looking at these enormous waves, how they managed to cross the Southern Ocean at 800 miles from Elephant Island to South Georgia, which was the last sort of leg of the journey, so that Shackleton was able to rescue his men.
It's an amazing experience, and Anna, I don't know if Anna can hear me as well, but Anna, how are you finding it? Are you scared? Is it a great adventure? What are you learning?
It's so interesting because when you stay on the boat you feel very at home and safe, but when you go out it's just like the whole of the elements are against you, but you seeing all the wildlife is just amazing.
Yes, Meredith here in the studio, just hearing about that's a young person who's being enthused about what was an extraordinary achievement at the time. But I mean, how does it rate in terms of survivals and exploration stories?
It's probably one of the greatest survival stories, but the extraordinary thing is they didn't know they were going to survive. So it's one of those stories that unfolds day by day, and this is where the photographs of the Australian Frank Hurley are so powerful, because Shackleton asked him to come as his recorder, filmmaker and photographer of the expedition, and he took the photographs not knowing, of course, what was going to happen.
Do you want to give us, just talk us through that first image we saw? There seemed to be, what was that, a bit of housekeeping on board ship?
Very important. Shackleton was tough. He made everyone of all 28, whether they were the scientists, whether Hurley the photographer, they all shared in the ship duties. That photograph of everyone doing housekeeping, actually 3 guys doing housekeeping, the ship has become stuck in the ice very early on, in fact within weeks of entering the ice, so that the whole plan of crossing Antarctica dies right there, and it then becomes a story of how do we get out of the ice.
And also one of grit and determination, because with that first photo we saw where they were scrubbing the floor, I understand that these were Shackleton's men who were told, you carry on with your everyday duties.
Well, the everyday duties were there to be done.
Yeah.
And once it was realised that this ship was going to be stuck for the winter, and the winter was 3 months when the sun never came above the horizon, a little space was created for about 12 of the men, which they called the Ritz, and it was actually in the hold. And there they are cleaning the floor, because that had to be cleaned once a week, and he had a rota, and that's the scientist, the doctor and the third officer doing it.
Yes, Rebecca, I hope you can still hear us. We've just been seeing some of those images there. It really brings home the conditions that they were operating in. Clearly they had none of the technology that we have now in terms of survival skills and navigation and all those things. I mean, it must bring it home to you, looking out at the landscape that you see, just what they had to endure.
Oh, I think so. And I think the most enduring thing was really Shackleton's spirit, because as we've heard here, they had no idea whether they were going to survive, and when we look at the context, 100 years ago so many expeditions ended in accident and depression and suicide, and if you read Shackleton's diaries and the diaries of his men, in actual point of fact they weren't just enduring it, but they were quite content, they were quite happy, and his leadership was such that he held up the optimism and the spirit of those men so that they believed that they would get home, despite the odds really said something quite different.
Meredith, can I just ask, I mean, we're hearing about his personality, Shackleton's personality there. It must take, I mean, there must have been a very, very hard edge to someone like that to get his men through those kind of circumstances.
There was a hard edge, but one of the things that I most admire about Shackleton was he was extremely cautious. And so when the men got off the ship and started going across the ice, he had something called a recall whistle, which he blew, and that meant come back. And quite often he said, no, you can't go on the ice. And so he was cautious to the point of astonishing some of the men, but the caution, he got every single person back under his command. Nobody, in fact, not even any really injuries except the steward who'd been the stowaway called Blackburn. His toes got frozen.
How did they stay warm?
They didn't. Well, they got. First of all, you get. I can tell you, having worked a lot in Antarctica, you get attuned to the cold. But they had good equipment of clothes. But when the ship went down, or when they had to leave the ship first, which was a month before it went down, they took what they could. And at first, when Shackleton said, everybody off the ship on the 27th of October 1915, they didn't think the ship would survive. They thought the ship was about to go down, so they tipped out onto the ice on this dreadful night of cold and misery, with the ship almost screaming in pain as the ice pressed her and ground and these dreadful noises. And next morning the ship was still there, and they thought maybe we can get the odd thing off, but it continued to be still there, so they started really scavenging. That's how Hurley saved his wonderful photographs and his cinefilms being made up to that point. He went down into the hold, and it was in something called the refrigerator. None of us know what this was, but he cut it open, and he found his cinefilm and his images 3 feet down under icy water, and he went down and he rescued them. That's why we have these pictures. But then, having rescued them, he had to keep them with him the whole time, because what next was on the ice, what was going to happen next. And so in a way the excitement of the images that we're seeing in the exhibition of the Royal Geographical Society in London is these are images that have had the same journey as the men. They travelled.
It's absolutely fascinating. Meredith, thank you very much. And Rebecca and Anna, enjoy the rest of your trip. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
The exhibition, as you heard, is called Enduring Lights on the Royal Geographical Society in London.